Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Wanda Curley, your authority on project, program, and portfolio management. This podcast is brought to you by PM Powered, a consulting company that can meet your needs in project, program, and portfolio management. So without further ado, let's get started. First thing I wanted to talk about, and it's kind of a long article, but I'll synthesize it so that we don't get bored with it. It's about AI and robotics are transforming disaster relief. It starts by saying that over the last 50 years, natural disasters have increased fivefold. That's a lot. Can you imagine fivefold? That includes tsunamis, that includes fires, and those of us that live in the United States have seen it in California and in the Midwest. And it includes earthquakes. So can you imagine all of this? But how can AI and other technologies help us? Well, AI, there are three areas where it has the greatest impact, and these are as cited by the AI, predictive mapping, and the power of crowd. And that was a very interesting area, and I'll talk about it in just a minute. Next-gen robotics and swarm solutions, and aerial drones and immediate aid supply. So let's talk about predictive mapping. There was an incident and it goes to crowdsourcing intelligence. So there was an incident in Ushahidi, and it was in Kenya, and there was violence that broke out in 2007. And one blogger proposed a simple yet powerful solution. He asked a question to the web. Any techies out there willing to do a mashup of where the violence and distress is occurring and put it on a map? Guess what? 4 techies did do that, and they actually created an answer to do this. They were able to take 40,000 verified reports and send alert backs to locals on the ground and viewers across the world. So since that has happened, there have been over 150 countries that do that, reaching a total of 20 million people across 100,000 plus deployments. So now the open source crisis mapping software, it's called V3, it's Ushahidi in the cloud, is accessible to anyone, mining millions of tweets, hundreds of thousands of news articles, and geotagged timestamp data for countless sources. So they're doing that in Syria right now. So can you imagine in Syria with all of the violence that's going on to be able to do crowdsourcing and understand where the violence is happening in real time? So that's amazing to me. So let's switch here a little bit. So okay, so let's take a coastal area where they might have tsunamis, or let's think about an earthquake. If we can get drones up in the air to alert the people in the area that a tsunami is coming and give them time to evacuate, can you imagine the power of that? Or if we're able to predict, eventually I have no doubt in my mind that we'll be able to predict when earthquakes will happen, and we can send drones out to help those people with that. And they can bring robots and drones quickly into the area once it's affected. So let's talk about autonomous robots and swarm solutions. So there's many robots, and there's one here called Cheetah 3, which was amazing to me. It's sort of a cheetah, but it's a robot, obviously. It doesn't have a head, it doesn't have a tail, but it walks sort of like a cheetah. And it actually can go 6.4 meters per second. And for a robot, that's pretty good. And then it can jump up to 60 centimeters. Granted, that's not as high as a cheetah can do, but it can jump small objects. And this happens in hazardous settings. And so think about a nuclear plant or a chemical factories where there's been a disaster. They can send in these robots to check on, see if they're survivors, to what's going on inside. Is there a fire getting ready to ensue, or has such a fire happened? So it can do all of this. And in fact, in Japan, they've been able to put Tokyo's electric power company, TEPCO, has put one of its own robots to the test for the first time since Japan's devastating 2011 tsunami, which led to 3 nuclear meltdowns in the nation. The Fukushima nuclear power plant, a robot has successfully examined the reactor's fuel. And in fact, it's been able to go to 3 of the 4 nuclear areas and extract a bit of the nuclear rod. And that's amazing. Can you imagine that? Because humans can't do that. There's another one that has nothing to do with nuclear plants, but think about a fire disaster going on over hundreds of acres of land. So it's a bot that delivers foam or water at 4,000 liters per minute and has a 1 megapascal of pressure. And it's called the Cannon bot. And it has an accompanying hose extension bot, even of a greater AI geared system to conduct reconnaissance and surveillance on larger targets. So as wildfires grow, if you have these bots that can go into areas that humans can't go, then it can displace some of the fire and maybe bring the fire into containment a lot quicker. Then there's another one that I found amazing. It's called the Fast Brick Robotics, and it's called it's Hadrian X, and it's actually a 3D printer, but it's able to take the soil of any place. It's been able to take all kinds of different soils and build houses, and it can do this very quickly. And it builds to standards of the area. And can you imagine having this in post-conflict refugee sites where you don't, or if you have in refugee sites where they don't have anything? So it can build, a place for people to stay for less than $1,000. So it offers a myriad of benefits, including natural insulation, low GHG emissions, fire protection, air circulation, and thermal mediation. And it's, again, all done through 3D printing of native soil. To me, that's just amazing. There's also other areas that are coming through. So there's these called, I'll do that in a minute, the swarm bots, but we'll talk about swarm bots in a minute. There's a snake bot that actually can go through rubble to see if there's any survivors and to see what kind of damage there is inside of the building. So can you imagine? It's got a camera and it's also got other sensors on it. Can you imagine if you're somebody in there and you see this snake bot coming in, then you can be assured that somebody knows that you're there. Can you imagine that? That's just amazing. Then there's another one called bee technology. And it takes bees, they're drones, and they land on buildings, they can land on bridges, they can land on many different things, and they can do an assessment of the integrity of the building or of the bridge. Can you imagine after an earthquake or even after a tsunami or flooding to find out if the integrity of a bridge or of a building is still intact, or what kind needs to be done? Then there's another one it's a drone called Zipline, and it actually has been bringing blood, vaccines, and other things to Rwanda and Tanzania and HIV medications to remote areas. So it's a drone, and it actually drops these vaccines through small pouches that have some type of parachute on them, or are put together so that when they hit the ground, they don't break. So that's delivering needed medical supplies to an area that absolutely could not get it if they did not have these drones. Now, the Marines are looking at a logistic glider, and that can be built for hundreds of dollars instead of thousands of dollars. And it can take up to 1,800 pounds of cargo. So can you imagine if Marines going into a disaster area and they know that there's people that are kind of in an island because they can't get out because they've got disaster all around them, they can now drop life-saving water, food to them so that they don't have to do it. Or if you have forward deployed Marines that need it, you could take forward deployed areas and do that on that. So can you imagine bringing all of this technology together and helping in any disaster that we have out there, and even in post-conflict, building a house for somebody in a post-conflict area, or even in poor remote areas? I know my husband and my daughter have gone out and have built in Mexico houses for people that are waiting, and it's sponsored by a church. But can you imagine if they can use the dirt instead of having to bring in cement blocks? If they can just use the dirt to build them a house, that would be amazing. Okay, so let's change the technology here a little bit. So Andrew actually running is one of the presidential Democratic campaigns, and he plans to campaign remotely by using a 3D hologram. He's going to have this 3D hologram on the back of a truck, and he's going to actually do his stump speeches. So he's actually pre-recorded the stump speeches, and he's doing the hologram to deliver for him. And he's saying he can be live and actually have the hologram out at 2 or 3 different places. He also said that if they have a debate with holograms, that he could debate his other people with a hologram instead of having to fly out to wherever the debate is at. And if everybody could have a hologram out there, that would be amazing to see that. I think we would lose a lot maybe of the expressions that you would see on people while they're debating if it's a hologram, because it's not live. But anyway, it's interesting to see how that'll work, and I'll be interested just to go and see the hologram and understand how it works. So let's change a little bit here, the aspect. I ran across this article about, you just bought a small business, now it's time to lead. Well, I wanted to bring this into project management because it was very similar. And it talks about this fellow that bought a small chocolate company and what happened. And he says it's important to establish credibility early. So when we're starting on a project as a project manager, whether it's a brand new project or you've been brought in because you're taking over a project for whatever reason, the other project manager left, the other project manager couldn't handle it, or you've brought in because the project's in trouble and you're the turnaround project manager. You have to establish credibility early, and if you don't, you will not be accepted. You'll always be compared to the other person. So make sure you understand to bring in your credibility early by understanding, by assessing, doing your homework up front, understand what's going on in that project. Don't just jump in on the day that you're there. Obviously, if you're brought in brand new to the company, you can't do it, but you can ask questions from the hiring manager about why you're being brought into this project. So establish your credibility early. Existing metrics will need to be revisited. If the project's in trouble, probably the existing metrics are not doing what you need to understand about the project. So understand what metrics are being done. Are they being done properly? So maybe that's the issue. And what other metrics do you have to bring in? I know I was on a project that was absolutely in trouble, and the metrics were saying that it was fine, but obviously there was something going on. Well, the data was wrong. That was part of the problem. And we were doing waterfall when we really should have been doing agile. So we should have done different type of metrics. So we switched it around, and it was amazing. The morale of the project turned around, and we started getting data that meant something. And keep an eye on the big picture. Yeah, you're tactical when you're a project manager, but you've got to keep the eye on the big picture of the total project. Remember, you're not there doing the day-to-day work. You're there to bring it to an end goal. So yes, you might have to help at times on day-to-day work, but don't forget you're there to bring the project to its end goal. Recognize adaptable employees. I have many times have said that adaptable employees are your godsend, because if you can take somebody that's doing, let's say they're doing very detailed work, but you see that they're adaptable and they're a good employee and they're good at what they do. If you can bring them into doing a small portion, a work stream of the project, because the work stream manager that you have isn't doing well, you might bring them in to do that. But you can't just put them there and leave them. You have to mentor them through. So mentor your employees. Put employees in places that are going to expand their knowledge. Yes, they're going to be uncomfortable for a while, but think of it as a learning experience, and so will they. So if you do all of this, you can be a good project manager just like you can be a good entrepreneur. So finally, I want to talk about the mission, the electrifying mission of the first private lunar spacecraft, and this was brought to you by Singularity Hub. Well, this was brought by the Google Lunar X Prize, which was $30 million, and they gave it to some entrepreneurs that were willing to do that. Well, it was an Israeli company that won it, and I'm sure you heard in the news that they did everything right. They were able to go around the moon. They orbited the moon. They were getting ready to land, and something happened, and it crash landed. But they got something on the moon, even if they did crash land. So think about it. They were successful in many, many ways. They were able to take the space, it was called the Space IL. So it was 3 young entrepreneurs who passionately and naively set out to land a mission on the moon. No funding and no hardware experience. They would go on to raise $100 million. Can you imagine that? And to build the Bearsheet spacecraft with a team of fewer than 50 engineers. That's amazing. Think about NASA and Russia. They had more than 50 engineers. They had a visionary funder. We also celebrate the vision and passion of Morris Khan, a South African-born Israeli billionaire who was so moved by the passion of Space IL founders that he committed nearly $50 million to fund the hardware development and launch. The impact on children and adults. Having spent the last week in Israel, I know this was the person reporting on this. I know that Team Space IL and the Bearsheet spacecraft were known by every school child and on the lips of everyone in conversation. Everywhere I've traveled in Israel over the past week, people young and old congratulated the X Prize Foundation over and over again for inspiring this mission. And they made history. The Bearsheet spacecraft made history more than once on its exciting journey. First, it was the first private company to orbit the moon and to touch the moon's surface. Granted, the landing wasn't successful, but they did touch the surface. Second, in making Israel the 7th nation behind the US, Russia, China, Japan, the European Space Agency, and India to orbit the moon, the 4th country to attempt a soft landing on the moon, and the 4th country to touch the moon's surface. So what's going on next? They've been given another $1 million to start a Bearsheet 2. So I hope to hear that in a few years that they're going to launch a Bearsheet 2.0 and actually have a safe landing on the moon. So if you are a project manager on Bearsheet 2 or Space IL project, I'd love to hear from you. Please contact me at wanda@pmpowered.com. Or if you have any information on the drones or the AI that I've talked about for disaster recoveries, I'd love to hear from you. Or if you're the project manager working on Andrew Yang's hologram, please contact me at wanda@pmpowered.com because I'd love to understand what's going on there and how you're making that technology work. I'm Wanda Curley, your authority on project, program, and portfolio management. This was brought to you by PM Powered, your company, your consulting company on project, program, and portfolio management, which can meet your needs in any of those areas. Please follow me on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, because I'd love to hear from you. And you can follow my YouTube podcast there. So have a blessed week, and we'll see you next week, next Monday. Take care.